We've all got these layouts. We've got 240 volts into a power supply. We've got 5 volt, 12 volt, 24 volt, whatever your pixels or dumb LEDs go into some sort of controller and out to the pixels. What happens if you get a fault? This all worked at home. At that point there, your pixel controller could be damaged, or your controller, your Raywu 27 channel or something like that, could be damaged. The output could be damaged. So what I tend to do is put a fuse at this point here, so any fault downstream gets cleared. Having said that, I don't do this with the 27 channel controllers. If one blows, one of the output blows, I'll fix it and move it to another one. I've got plenty of spares. But I do it with all my pixel controllers. And you'll see why when we get to the P2s, why that's actually very important. What happens if the fault's actually within the controller? Normally it tends to be within the power side of the controller, so it's where you've got all the outputs. You've got a 27. You've got a P12R up the back there. Oh, I think I might have a photo here anyway. I put a fuse out of the power supply that's just on the electronics side. So if the voltage regulator blows, if you're running it on 12 volts, which I've had one go, it'll actually blow the fuse rather than possibly damage the board, which is what actually happened to mine. What happens when the fault's actually in the power supply? Has anyone seen that? I have. It's not pretty. Don't rely on the Chinese controllers to actually shut themselves down if there's a short on the output or there's a short within it. They do catch fire. It wasn't pretty. I was actually lucky that it was on the floor in the garage testing it. Flames were about that high. So I actually just put a fuse on the 240 volt. Don't rely on the fuse or your circuit breaker back at the board, because they're usually 10, 15, 20 amps, well, usually 16 or 20 amps. It takes a heck of a lot to actually blow those. By that stage, you've usually done some pretty serious damage in the power supply. Mine are running on, I think, 2 amp fuses. And they're all quick blow fuses, all mine. Here's a P12R, or S, whichever. They've actually got the main fuse there to protect the whole output area, as well as individual output fuses. They don't have a fuse on the electronic side. If you're running them off 12 volt, everything goes through the little 5 volt regulator. Should be enough to protect you. Should be. Most of mine are run on 5 volts, so. P2. No power transfer to the pixels. Ben, how many have we seen people powering pixels through a P2? Yeah. The P2 is not designed to actually run power to a pixel. You can run half a dozen pixels for testing, that's about it. Any more than that, you'll do damage. So you can't just replace the P2 how I had it set up before. That won't work. This is how I have them set up. I've got power supply into a fuse block, and from there just a little one goes over to the P2 to power the P2. The data and clock, or just data if you're using a 802.11. Was it? Yeah. And 5 volts go straight out to the pixels. That's the way I do it with all mine. And it works really well. There's some pictures set up here to show you exactly what I mean. They're the fuse blocks that Ben uses, the ones on the left, I think.
I used to, I won't be anymore. I'll be using Anson Electronics text fuse. It's right.
Okay. Right, I'll have a look at those too. I've got a combination of both those. The ones on the right-hand side are David AVDs, and they work really well. They've got 3 inputs, and each one of those inputs goes to 2 fuses. And he says 10 amp maximum on them. They're good for a heck of a lot more than 10 amps. I'm running 30 amps on a couple of mine. No dramas at all. Only a couple. I had to. I had no other choice. That's one of my boxes. And as you can see, I've got Yeah, I know. Power coming out here unfused to supply the P12R. I've got fuse blocks here, and they're actually going to external power injection points. A lot of nearly all my pixels are 5 volt, and I have multiple power injection points out in the yard, 2 strings. Some of them run 100 pixels, no power injection. Others have got power injection every 25, depending on the pixel type. The Stellar Greens, I've got 170 pixels in a row, no power injection. And the first one and the last one are the same colour. I've got Ray Wu 50 strings, and if I don't inject both ends, I end up with very pink at one end. Here's the one that you like, Ben. This is actually my matrix board. The box is only, well, you can see the size of a standard power supply. It's actually got 2 P2s, one there, 2 power injection points, and 2 power supplies. And that actually sits on the side of the matrix, which you can see on the side there. The thing gets to about 45 degrees when it's running full white. Full white draws around 550 watts out of the power supplies, so it's pushing them. And they're Ray Wu power supplies too. People on the forum are constantly saying, oh, how can I run one controller with 2 different voltages? Well, with the P12, it's easy because you've got 2 different sides. You can power 12 volts on one and 5 volts on the other. The P2 is just as easy. That was exactly how we had it set up before. Power into a fuse block, 5 volts, and 5 volts to power the P2, 5 volts out to the pixels, and the data clock out to the pixels. And in your little lead that goes out to the pixels, some comes from the P2, the others come from the power supply. That's it. 240 volts also goes to the other power supply, and 12 volts goes to a fuse block and out to the pixels, and you just take the other output of the P2 out to there. You don't have to worry about it. And in fact, I've got one set of pixels that actually has 24 volt, 5 volt and 12 volt on the one line, and they're all powered from a single output of a P2. It's easy as anything to do. Yes. They're the negatives connected together. And that is important. If you don't do that, the data from this doesn't have a common negative to actually verify that it's the correct data, because the negative from here is used for the data. So because you're powering it from this power supply, you need the 2 negatives connected together. And I just use a piece of 2.5mm cable because it's literally that far apart. And that's what happens if you don't fuse. It was actually alcohol. I was cleaning the board at the time. I was cleaning the LEDs because they got water on them, which we'll cover tomorrow, but there was some damage there, and I had them running and poured isopropyl alcohol on the back and scrubbed. I'd forgot to connect the wire there correctly. I just had them put in. I bumped it with the brush. It caught fire, and what was the first thing that I did? I grabbed the phone and took a photo. Oh no, it wasn't that bad. Yeah, and that's it. It's quick and easy. Tomorrow I'll actually bring multimeters and I'll show, because I'm doing current and voltage measurement as well tomorrow. And I'll also show you the fusing layouts that I've got in some of my boards. Thank you.